for attending today. My name is Christine Sartory, and I am the librarian here at the high school. I would like to thank Dr. Harrington for attending, Mr. Gazzone, Mr. Iavino, I see, Dr. Zirianis, Mrs. Pravito. This is wonderful. All of my colleagues. But the most important people here today are authors. So I'd like to introduce them. But first, I would just like to say, if that will stay up, that this is a very special day because we have 4 authors right here in-house. So we decided to take advantage of this opportunity. So we have Mrs. Bonnie Hennessy, Mr. Richie Woods, who's retiring this year, sadly, Mr. Frank Nappi, and Mr. Jeffrey Risener. So they all have a specialty. Mrs. Hennessy has the newest book called Twisted, a wonderful novel. And then we have Mr. Woods specializing in nonfiction, a book on Oceanside, and several others. Mr. Nappi has many books. My favorite, Echoes from the Infantry. And then finally, Mr. Risener, How to Raise a Child in the World of Sports. So we'd like to just tap into their brains today and find out as much as we can about the writing and publishing process. I would like to introduce Dr. Dianna Bierne, who works here in the library.
Thank you.
She will be our moderator today. So she'll be asking questions, but at the end, please feel free to ask questions if there is time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Again, thanks everybody for coming out. We're going to jump right into the questions, and I'm going to give you, I think, a little bit of a softball question to start out with, one you've probably already heard before. So as authors, I wonder if you all have a favorite author, and if you model your writing on any of your favorite authors. Why don't we start with Bonnie, and then we'll go right down at the end.
As far as like a favorite author, I think when you're an English teacher, right, sorry. Or is that all right?
Hey, wow.
All right.
There it is.
As an English teacher, I feel like you're always surrounded by all the writers that we teach the kids, which are a lot of the classics and things like that. I think the one that always stands out to me, though, is the first one I read as a kid or a teenager that made me realize that it wasn't all Little Women and all the books that my Catholic school education taught me. And I always say that was Anne Rice. And I find anybody who read Anne Rice always remembers her. And I remember it was the first time that my mom and her twin sister were talking about this book, The Witching Hour, and all of a sudden my friend at 17 started talking to them about this book, like actually having a conversation about a book that didn't involve school and things. And I felt really left out. And so I kind of immediately decided that I had to figure out what was this book that they were talking about. At which point, if you're familiar with it, my mother handed it to me, and it's about this thick. And I said, oh God. And we were going skiing the next day, I remember, and I took it up skiing with me, and I started reading it. And it was about vampires, and not vampires, that was a different one by her. It was about witches and all sorts of things, and it had things in there I couldn't believe my mother read. And I remember looking at my very Catholic mother in the car and going, oh my goodness, and you let me read this? And this was just really the wildest story I'd ever read. There was no one in a petticoat. There was nothing like that I had read in school. And I always say when I think of my favorite author, she always pops in my mind first because she was the first one who made me realize that you could write about things that were outside of the school curriculum and that were exciting to me and different. So even now, even though I don't think I've read anything by her recently, she's always the first one who pops in my head. She made that first impression that a story could be something different than I thought it could be.
Did she influence your writing for Twisted?
Well, it's funny. I actually this book is fantasy. Mm-hmm. This was my first book of fantasy. And so I would normally say no. I always wrote very realistic type of fiction. And this one actually ended up being inspired by my daughter as telling her bedtime stories at night. So I wouldn't say that Anne Rice directly influenced my style or anything. She just made me realize that you could tell a tale that went outside of everything I thought was what a story was as a teenager at that point. Great. Which is why I love getting to teach all the variety of what we teach kids now, because they don't have those limitations that I remember feeling as a student. They know that there's a lot more out there than just some of the traditional works.
Thanks, Bonnie. Richie, he has his own.
You have your own.
Everybody's got a mic.
Oh, everybody has their own
Hey.
mic. This is big time. Testing.
No, everybody.
Hello.
There it is.
Frank Nappi's my I do like Frank Nappi. I think he writes as well as anybody that I've read before. It's just going to be that one break he needs to spiral to the top. But my genre is suspense and murder mystery. So right now, my favorite author is Michael Connelly. I know that's, I don't know, as far as restaurants, it's more like McDonald's, you know what I mean? It's not, he's not big time, it's not F. Scott Fitzgerald, but I do love him. And I just love the way he writes. He makes me laugh when I'm not expecting it, which I like too, and the mystery is really always good. And it's an easy read too. I really wasn't always a reader. I was a person that couldn't sit still in your class maybe, but it was great. When I first started reading a lot, it was like I discovered something and I couldn't wait to share it with everybody else because I just thought it was the greatest thing and I couldn't stop reading. And he really, Michael Connelly, hasn't influenced the way I've written because what I write is more research type books, so not fiction. But when I do write a fiction book, I want to be like Frank Nappi. Seriously, he writes as well as anybody. When I read his books, I feel the emotion. I do laugh. I'm in him big time, and so if I'm going to write a fiction book in retirement, and but he's an influence on me, Frank Nappi.
Great, thank you, Frank.
Well, the most amazing thing about what Mr. Woods just said is it only cost me $25 to have him say it. I like Bonnie, I'm an English teacher, and I've been an English teacher here for almost 30 years. And as an English teacher, I believe that you can't really love the language and the craft of books and the creative process without talking about F. Scott Fitzgerald, that Mr. Woods knows is my favorite. And I have some students here who have heard me going on and on for maybe like too long about the attention to detail and the beauty of the language that Fitzgerald uses. And I'm not gonna, Mr. Woods' praise was way too high. I do try to, when I write, have that same attention to detail and the care with words and sentences of Fitzgerald. He obviously is an influence, I think, on everybody who's read really good quality literature. On a more contemporary level, I like Nelson DeMille and I like Ian McEwan also, and Tim O'Brien is also a favorite of mine. I just feel as though those authors that really take the time to not only tell you the story, but to really craft it in a way that's meaningful, really brings to life the whole reading experience.
Thanks, Frank.
Hi, so I'm just thrilled to be here. I guess you might say I'm the lifetime athlete, somebody who's been playing sports since I was born. So as a child, I vividly remember sitting in my elementary classrooms reading Matt Christopher books, Little League tournament, and then I kind of gravitated towards autobiographies of athletes. My hero growing up was Stan Musial. Living in New York, I hated the Yankees, but I did read about Mickey Mantle. So, growing up, Willie Mays, etc., I just liked reading sports books, play sports every single day. My mom would come and, Jeff, it's time to come home for dinner, it's 8 o'clock. And, I could play it in the streets all day long and not be bothered to bother anybody. But now as an adult, I just finished reading Commander-in-Chief, Flags of Our Fathers, Unbroken. My dad passed away in 1982. I'm a dad myself, and how am I not living, although I may look older, not living through World War II? That's really now my new interest, is World War II, that great generation. So I'm trying, when I have time, read anything I can about this World War II generation. And those 3 books, big parts of it, were about World War II. So in terms of my favorite all-time author, I have to say it's Matt Christopher, because as a child he motivated me to think about it as I got older into coaching. When I stopped playing myself, I really developed at a very young age, 14, coaching kids and children. So I used to read all things from all kinds of coaches, whether it's Joe Lapchick or Red Holzman, Joe Torre, just to motivate me, to help me in my career as a coach, PE teacher, and now as a director. So it's a whole culmination of things.
Thanks, Jeff. Richie, you mentioned research, so we'll start with you and then we'll kind of go around this way. Talk to us about the kind of research that you all had to do for your books, both as fiction and nonfiction writers.
The first book I wrote was, this is how I got into writing. I had a great uncle who was in silent movies. His name was Johnny Walker. And I kind of found out that he was more popular than my family had ever let on. And he had done like over 100 movies, and for a couple of years in the 20s, he was one of the biggest stars. But no one in our family ever talked about him. My grandmother, his brother, it was, I think, possibly because he lived the Hollywood life. Everybody who was in my grandmother's family was a civil servant, fireman, policeman, worked for the city. And this guy had the life. And so they and he also was married, divorced, wine woman song, the whole thing. So they never really talked about him. But I found out that he was a little more famous than they ever let on. So that's spirited me to do the research. So I did it all over the country. I tried to get to every library I could in the Library of Congress, but it's just something I enjoyed, and that's how I started. The library at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, I would go there. So this is a little different than everybody else. Like, I really get a kick out of finding out things that are brand new to me by looking at historical documents and things like that. So that kind of led me into the books on Oceanside too, because I picked up a book in Barnes & Noble one day, and it was the history of Syosset. And I looked at it and I said, I think we're as good as Syosset. So I figured I would do the one for Oceanside, but it was a labor of love in searching documents and speaking to people and interviewing people. And Queens Library has the historical, it's a good historical site for Long Island in general and the towns, and Hofstra has a great historical part too. So again, I was excited to do it, and I chose, I don't know if this is going to come up later about the publishers. Should I wait?
No, go ahead.
I wanted to, the first book I published by myself. I just got someone to print it. I made 200 copies. It was my uncle, and so my goal was to get it in all the performing arts libraries in the United States that I could. And some overseas it went to also, because it's more like a reference book. And with the second book, though, I saw that this was an actual publishing company that did local histories. So I contacted them, and they allowed me to do it. And I asked them for, I don't know, if I could do it over a couple of years, and they said, yeah, you can do it over 10 months. So it was a lot of work during the day and at night, and I try to get it all done. But that was, what interested me was the historical part of it. So again, I'm a little different than
So is
the
it more
guys
of
on
a
the
passion
panel.
project for you then, you would feel, the books, specifically the Oceanside books then?
Yeah.
Well, your family book.
Yeah, I really got a kick out of doing it and meeting a lot of people in Oceanside and finding out, interesting things about Oceanside. I'll just throw a couple out. We had the largest private zoo in the country in the 30s. We had the Ku Klux Klan living here in all its glory in the 20s and 30s, and right up to the 40s and 50s. Just so I'll stop there. But there's, obviously there's interesting parts about our history that I learned that I wouldn't have if I hadn't done the research.
Great. Thanks, Richie. Frank? We're talking about research.
Right. Well, my research sort of came to me, unlike Rich, who had to kind of pursue it. One of the most incredible things that happened to me, it really was life-changing, was inviting 2 World War II veterans into my integrated classes to speak to the kids about their experiences both during the war and post-war. Mr. Eddie Hines, who was an Oceanside resident for a long time, some of you may know the name or the family, and Mr. Bill McGinn from Farmingdale. They would come in and they would speak to the kids, again, about the experiences that they had during World War II on the battlefield. And they would always talk about, of course, what it was like to come back afterwards and try to resume life as if nothing had ever happened. And it was always amazing to me to watch as these two old men would talk to these kids about these various stories, and there was not a sound in the room. It was incredible. I mean, they could hold their attention like I still haven't been able to, and like nobody can. And the relationship that Bill and Eddie have with the kids was special too, because I always would tell the kids, you gotta write them letters and say thank you for coming in. And then, of course, then Eddie and Bill would write back, and then the kids would write back, and I would have kids saying, Mr. Abby, he's still writing me, it's 4 or 5 months later. They loved those letters. And that went back and forth, went on for a while. And unfortunately, I think it was around 2000, Bill passed away. And it was devastating for me on a personal level, because I'd grown very close to him at that point. It's funny, they would talk to the kids and they would tell them stories, but it was always school appropriate. And then later on, I would meet with them and they would say, Frank, you want to hear the whole story? And I did. And it was incredible. Some of the stories they told were amazing. And they didn't tell anybody any stories for a long time, so it was therapeutic for them too, to unload what they've been carrying around for so long. PTSD was not a popular thing back then, but obviously we know all about it today. So when Bill passed away, I told Eddie, I said, I feel this horrible void, and I feel so bad that students going forward are never going to hear Bill tell a story. And I said to Eddie, do you think it would be a good idea if I tried to maybe get down in writing what he was talking about, and maybe some short stories? He said, yeah, it'd be great. And I'll tell you some of mine too before it's too late, he said to me. Yeah, just joking. Unfortunately, he lived a long time after that. So I started, putting the stories together, and that became, what Mrs. Sartory referenced before was Echoes from the Infantry, which was the first book that I published. So I didn't have to do any formal research, although I did go around and interview, it was maybe 30 or 40 World War II veterans from around Long Island. And I always did tell Bill, and I told Eddie rather, I said, I don't know what happened with you and Bill, because these two guys, Eddie and Bill, they had more stories. I'm talking about actual combat, hand-to-hand, harrowing things happened to them. And the 30 or 40 other veterans I spoke to, I mean, they barely got scratched. I don't know what Bill and Eddie were doing over there, but they had experienced all these horrific things that were really, life-changing for them, certainly. So that was the Echoes from the Infantry. And then the Mickey Tussle series, which is about an autistic baseball player, again, not a lot of formal research was done, because I had spent so much time with Challenger Baseball in Massapequa and with Mrs. Ellis's Best Buddies group, and I sort of came to know a lot of the mannerisms and behaviors and patterns that special needs individuals experience and exhibit, and that sort of became the crux and the basis for the title character in that series. And the psychological novels that I've written, I've pieced together here. No research required for those. It was just, a little bit of observation here, observation there, and people speculate, but, we won't talk about any more of that here.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. So I had the luxury and pleasure in my career of teaching elementary, middle school, and high school. I also had the luxury of coaching elementary age children, middle school, high school, and college. I coached at Division I University, Columbia. I also coached at a Division III school. Also, when I was coaching college basketball, we used to get, whenever a team would come into New York, they needed a place to practice, so they would call me up, whether it was the LA Lakers with Magic Johnson or the Miami Heat, whoever it was, they needed a place to practice. So back also in the day, at this time, I was also coaching my own kids in youth groups, in youth leagues. So I had the advantage of observing young children being coached by other adults. So I'm riding I don't know if it was the subway, the LIRR, or the bus, or whatever I was doing to commute back and forth. And I did write my book, Commuting, on trains. I put all those, these, in terms of research, just as the other panelists, Mr. Nappi and Mr. Wood said, I would talk to the professionals who came into the garden, what their early childhood was like playing a sport. My own experiences coaching college kids, of course, at different levels, high school, and then coaching my own son and my daughter in youth leagues. So I said, wow, and then all the reading I did, as I mentioned before, whatever I would read on Thomas Tutko, for example, on sports psyching. I used to read books on nutrition. I'd go to the library and follow up and do some research on nutrition for kids. look at the ads in newspapers on what sports equipment was costing those days. So I would be a consumer. I'd go to Modell's. I'd go to Play It Again. The best price I could get for my son, just like Emma Garrick is here. I'm sure Mrs. Garrick wants the best prices for her daughter, who's playing lacrosse, which, as Mrs. Bierne knows, is a very expensive proposition. So I have a chapter in my book about buying sports equipment for your kids. Where do they get their information from? By talking to other people, by looking at ads, by going to stores and finding out about equipment, and then finding out about the rating of certain equipment. So I put all that together, the stuff on nutrition, injuries. I would consult with orthopedists, with doctors, with my own research on how to treat athletic injuries, my own experience with dealing with trainers at all different levels. So lo and behold, after that part of it, and then my experiences talking with other coaches, I put my book together on what I think is an appropriate way for kids to play sports. So my research was both observation, hands-on, book, and being a consumer.
Thanks, Jeff. Bonnie, research.
For me, for research, it kind of depends on the book I'm writing and how much I need to do. I know with Twisted, that one was a fantasy book. It came mostly from my imagination. I remember looking into what was being written about this particular fairy tale, which wasn't a lot at that particular time. But for instance, I have another one I just finished last weekend that I'm going to be editing and getting together. And it's set in rural Ireland, and it deals with round towers and all sorts of structures that I had to actually study and know something about. I know enough about them to talk to you informally, but when you're putting it in the midst of a story, it's got to be anchored in a lot of facts. So that became a lot more research for me, getting into that and knowing all the ins and outs of what I was writing about. I actually have a book that's 2 down the line. I have a little bit of a queue, and that one's going to be a retelling of the Medusa story. And so that one's going to require, I think, a fair amount of research. She's a mythical creature, but there's a lot there for that one. So I've kind of have that one on the back burner because that's going to take me a little bit of time, and I'm going to need to devote some more energy to that. But for me, it usually starts with an idea. Something sparks in my mind, and I always call it the itch. I just suddenly can't stop thinking about that idea, that little, conflict, that problem. With Twisted, it was the story of Rumpelstiltskin, and all I kept thinking about after I told my daughter this story that night was, this is a horrible, horrible story. This poor girl has this horrible father who keeps, going into restaurants and bragging about stuff and making up stories. This is awful, this poor girl. She gets locked in a tower and told to make gold or else they're going to kill her father. That's ridiculous. And I kept thinking, I can't believe this was my book that my mother read to me. Again, I guess she was reading the other stuff that I realized were kind of creepy. And so it usually for me starts with just an idea, something that I can't imagine dealing with, and I call it the itch, and I just start writing about it. And then all of a sudden, details might need to be researched or, honed to make the story real and make sense. So again, for me, as far as research is concerned, it depends on the book, depends on the story, and how much I need.
Great, thanks, Bonnie. I heard experience mentioned quite a bit, so let's talk a little bit about your personal experiences and where you can find them within your books, if at all. And I'm going to start with you, Frank, and specifically to our fiction writers. I wonder if you've based any of your characters off of anyone in your life, and if you got caught.
Well, again, the echoes from an infantry book was the main character, James McCleary, was really an amalgam of Eddie and Bill and, fiction. So I was safe there. Unfortunately, Bill was gone already, and Eddie didn't care. He said, it's okay. I know, it says it's fiction in the beginning, so he wasn't worried. The funny story about that is I played baseball for a long time, like Jeff. And I played in high school, and I played a little bit in college. And some of the guys I played with in high school, I ran into one of them in the lobby of Oceanside High School during back-to-school night. And I heard him call my name, and I didn't know who it was. And I said, Darren, what are you doing here? He said, what do you mean? My daughter goes here. I said, what do you mean your daughter goes there? She's a senior, he said. I'm like, how is it possible she's a senior? I've never met her or seen her in the 3 years. So we started talking about, Oceanside, and I graduated from Farmingdale High School, so we talked about Farmingdale and who he's been talking to. And they said, Frank, I have to ask you a question. He's like, me and a couple of the guys were together like a few months ago. All right, just tell me, in the book. The guy's name is Woody. Woody's Chris, right? And they were trying to figure out, which of the characters were actual characters. And the answer to the question is, some are in that series, there are some characters who are based on actual people. And one of the more tragic ones, one of the characters in the first book, his nickname is Boxcar. Raymond Miller is the catcher. He was the catcher of our team, the varsity team. He was a senior when I was a sophomore, and he was exactly how he is in the book. He was a force. He was like more of a coach than the actual coach was. And the funny story that I tell my class this story also when we talk about creating characters and how real life kind of spills into in fiction. Boxcar, this kid, his name was Chris Adams, really. He would come out and he would take all the players out to the field to do the stretching, and the underclassmen, which was me, and a bunch of other guys, would have to wheel like the jugs machine, which was the pitching machine, out to the field. So we got the jug machine all set up. The jug machine is like these two wheels that go like this, and they pitch balls to do batting practice. So we had gotten out to the field one day, and he realized that at Farmingdale High School at the time, the field backed up to this wooded area, and there was a dirt bike trail in the back. And for some reason, the dirty kids, as we call them, the dirt bikers, used to hate the athletes, and they would come on our field all the time. Well, at some point, the night before, they had torn up our entire field. And we got out there, and he was like enraged, and he started setting everything up anyway, and he said, let's just set it up, it's okay. And then we heard the sound of the bikes a little way off, and they were probably wanted to see what the reaction was. And he lost his mind. He said, he heard them, he told some other kid, he said, Mikey, bring that box of balls over here. And he took the handle of the jugs machine, and he actually had this kid feeding the balls, and he was shooting these balls at the kids as they were going by. And so he was a character in real life. The tragic part of it is when he graduated high school, he went into the Air Force, and he died during the attacks on the Saudi Arabia U.S. barracks. And his jersey is enshrined in Farmingdale, and there's a field in Massapequa we played on as kids that are dedicated to him as well. So that character is an actual character. He's true to life all the way. What I find, and probably since Bonnie, you do fiction also, you might be able to talk about this also. A lot of times, characters become this composite of different people that personality-wise, maybe physicality, things like that. And then there are some, of course, who are just strictly from your imagination. So really, it's a mix of both. But I always tell the creative writing kids, they always say, I have nothing to write about. No one's interested in that. Nothing's happening. And I always tell them, you have to be kidding me. Just look around everywhere you are. There's a story to be told everywhere you go. Just open your eyes and take a look. So my answer, again, for me, is that it's probably a mix of both, and I haven't really gotten caught yet.
Thanks, Frank. Jeff, do you have your personal stories at all within your book, or stories from your family?
Not really, but being only 5'6" and wanting to play for the Boston Celtics back in the day, that I guess the word a bias or a discrimination against somebody who was 5'6", overcoming some other adversities. And like Mr. Nappi, I made the varsity baseball team in my high school, which was probably twice the size of Oceanside, and I was a starting shortstop. So I had to overcome, I guess, being smaller and being an athlete, there were some obstacles. So when I started to coach, I guess all those things were in the back of my mind on how I was so rooting for the underdog, that boy or girl who was told they can't do it because of their size. And then I have to tell you, I still have t-shirts from when I was in college. So when I said before about going out and buying equipment, models, etc., I save everything. Coming from a poor background, my family, I'm proud to say we didn't have a lot of money. So that also was in the back of my mind writing my book. How do you get the best bang for your buck when you're buying stuff? So I put the chapter in there about buying equipment. So I think my life experiences.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Bonnie, any characters that you base on anybody?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I never know that I'm doing it, and I've never been caught. But I do laugh that I don't know I'm doing it, but as I'm doing about a third revision on something, and I can't quite get something right, and I'm really particularly irritated with something, a character, what's happening, I suddenly will sit up and go, oh, I wrote about him again. I wrote
Again.
about that again. And I don't know that I'm doing it. And actually, I've never been caught. People in my family have no idea. Thank God it's fantasy. There's lots of layers there. The only one who's ever caught me is my husband, because he knows me really well. And he's had to read. I joked I did the Human Relations Day talk with a lot of the kids. And so I said I had to write about 5 really bad books before I got to this one. And I'm very proud of those bad books because they're what got me here. And so he's read those, poor guy, 5 bad books right along with me until we got to this one. And so he did laugh. He was reading this last one. He's like, you know, you did it again. And I said, I know. I don't know why I keep doing that. But it seems to be those dynamics of relationships with
Is
people.
there one character that was in those last 5 books?
There's a couple, and I can't say more because I'm always
You don't have
afraid,
to.
kind of, that somehow that will come back to me. But I don't, like I said, I think the funny part is I don't know that I'm doing it. I'm never planning to do it. It's just when a dynamic comes up between a couple of characters, and it seems like I'm particularly good at describing it. It seems like it might be because I've had a little experience with it, is what it might come down to. So like I said, in the end, my husband will always, when he's doing a proof or something like that, he'll lean over and go, you did it again. So yes, they do eat their way in there, and I am notoriously bad at naming characters and titling books. I don't like labels. I'm not good at that. So my kids think it's a joke. I do work names in every so often. Like my son was very excited. He found his name. His name's Seamus, S-E-A-M-U-S. It's very uncommon here. And so he found it pop up in the book, and he was very, very excited, you know, that his name popped up there. So that's kind
Is
of
he going to be in the book about Ireland too, Seamus?
well, he's already in this one, so I told him he's already been in one. And the next one has to have different names, so no, he probably won't be in this one.
Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, Richie. You have any of your personal experiences or family story? Well, that was your family.
It's all person.
This will be the shortest of these responses.
That's all right.
First of all, I always thought I was Woody in your book.
You are.
Okay. And I know I looked a lot younger than Frank, but would you please laugh louder at that?
I got the mic.
No. Thank you. But Frank played when I was coaching here for Farmingdale High School, and I coached, and he beat us 2-1. I do remember that. Oh, sorry, Frank.
I didn't give up any runs.
All right, 1-0. I do remember that game very well. But the only thing that I put in my book that's probably personal is like a little sense of humor in there. Try to be a little creative, and
So it's your
some of the jokes
personality.
people get, just like, and some of them they don't, just kind of like the one I just did. But I think they're funny. But that's about it.
You would say your personality is more what shines through in that in terms of...
Yeah, I think a little bit of my personality comes through. Also, I picked the people that are in the book. That's the Legendary Locals book, and that's a personal choice. But I also have realized since I published it, I missed a few too. So I didn't make the, I missed a couple of choices too. So thank you.
You're going to have to do a sequel.
Yeah, I wish I could.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Thanks, Richie. Jeff, do you have a favorite place where you write? And we'll come around.
Actually, one of the best, another book I read, and now things come back to me, but a book by Alan Lakey, and How to Make the Most of Your Time in Your Life. So I really believe that. I try to make every minute of every day count, doing something meaningful, even if it's like I did last night, going to bed really early because I was tired. And I'd rather go to sleep and watch something on TV.
You had to prep for this big event, too.
So, believe it or not, as I said before, I wrote my book while I was commuting. Rather than, as I said, sit on the train and watch the doctor something signs in some place to get your teeth fixed and your nails done and your hair, whatever. I used to just put my thoughts all on paper. Back then, you didn't have an iPad. In 1998, when my book was published, and they didn't have the technology they have today. So rather than sit on the train and I would get the newspaper in, of course, but it would take me 2 hours to get there and 2 hours back, so that's 4 hours out of my day. So following my logic about making the most of my time in my life, I would put all my thoughts, because I couldn't do it when I was at school, because I was administrating, or I was coaching, or teaching. So put my thoughts together. As soon as I got home, I would get on the computer and put everything I wrote on the computer, and it took me about 2.5 years to put it all together and get it done. So
So your place to write was on the train.
commuting, making the most of my time in my life.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks, Jeff. Bonnie, you have a place?
Well, when I was writing Twisted, that one came to me when the kids were really little, and anybody who knows me knows my husband was sick when my kids were little. He's fine now, but he was kind of out of commission. He had cancer for several years, and I think it even started with the book I was writing before that. So like I said, I had this itch. I really felt like I had to write, but I had a child under 1 year old, and I had a 2-year-old. And there wasn't a lot of anything that required thinking that was going to happen in basically a single parent household like that. So, you know, you talk about making the most of your time. I had a son who liked to get up really, really early. And so I had been trained to get up at 4:30 in the morning with him because he had this super early morning habit of waking me up. So at some point, what I ended up doing to make the most of my time was I started learning the power of the TV and sippy cups and sugar cereal and the remote. So I would actually get up at 5 in the morning, and I had all these things set up on the counter. I had all the cereals, I never used to buy them. I had juice that I never bought them. I had, you know, crack on TV, you know, taught them how to use the remote. And I would say, okay, sit here real quiet and don't bother Daddy. And you can watch TV as long as you want. And this to them was crazy because I was the mom who limited everything. It was like, you know, 25 minutes of the TV a day, that's it. You can't have this, you can't have that. So I think it became this tacit agreement that if they would be quiet and let mommy write, then they could watch TV. So what ended up being really nice was as they got a little bit older, I was able to sneak out of the house. And I say that Starbucks probably, you know, is doing as well as it is because of me. Because I would sneak out there at 6 in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays and write till 9 o'clock with the headsets on. And if you ever bumped into me, I can't promise that I brushed my teeth or had really fixed my hair at that point because I knew I had a finite number of hours to get writing before I had to get home and put on, you know, the whole mom duties and everything. So for me, it was mostly an early morning activity. And now that they're getting older, I keep thinking I'm going to be able to do it at home too. Only now they're just louder and they have more requests. So it was really funny. My son gave me his really expensive headsets, and he said, "Mom, you can put these on, and then we're not going to bother you." And so I said, "Ooh, this sounds great." So I sat in a room and I put them on, and I was ready to write. And then every 2 seconds, I kept feeling them pulling the headset away. "Mom, I need that. Mom, can you try me here? Mom, I need that. Mom, come on, take me here." And I said, "Oh my goodness, Starbucks, here I come." So I will say that I do very often still find that I'm writing there, or when I drive my daughter to horseback riding and she's in there, I've got 3 hours in the car that I get to write. So again, it's all about, I feel like if you have your day job and you happen to have a family, it's about finding these rare, odd moments and places where you're gonna be writing. In fact, I was at the middle school and the kids found out about that, and it became this joke that they were gonna wake up one Saturday and try to bust me over at Starbucks because I laughed. I said the joke about my teeth and my hair, and they said, "I don't believe that, Mrs. Hennessy." And I said, "Well, I hope you never find out." So I will say every once in a while I was in there and I'd look up and say, "God, please don't let them walk in."
I don't have a place, but when I want to write, I just write, and it's kind of like a drug, you know. I just need to write and get it all out. I've been doing it for a really long time. I have published 3 books, but before that I wrote articles for periodicals too, and I just love it, and it could be anywhere, you know. It's not necessarily like I need, there is, when I did the Oceanside book, the first one, I do remember that I went down to the basement every night, because I had to get it done 10 months, and I worked till like 11:30 every night, you know, so that was one spot where I wrote, but I don't know, when I feel like I got to get it out, I just get it out, you know, and so it could be anywhere, but to me it's more like, you know, when you say the itch, I mean, yours is a creative itch, mine's like sometimes creative too. I haven't just done historical things too, but it just could be anywhere, so I just got to get it out.
Do you have to have a process for kind of getting into the mindset, or you just
You know
start
what it
typing?
is? It starts, I don't know if itch is the word that Bonnie uses, but I mean, I just feel like at some points I just got to get it out of myself, you know? It's all inside of me, and that's when I got to write, you know? I feel like I'm all filled up and I got to let it all out, whatever it is, so it doesn't, you know, necessarily have to be a certain place or something like that.
Okay. Frank, you have a place? A writing studio?
Well, I mean, for me, it's sort of like what Rich and Bonnie had described here a little bit. You know, we think we have control of what we're doing, and, you know, we can organize and plan things out. But the reality is, I mean, this thing called writing gets inside of you, and it takes on a life of its own. You know, it demands things from you, it trails you everywhere, it wakes you up in the middle of the night, interrupts you during the course of your day. You don't sleep properly, you don't eat properly. It pops up, and it's this itch that Bonnie mentioned, and, you know, Richie's, you know, urge to, you know, purge himself when he has to, you know, get the words down on paper is true. And it's funny what Jeff said before about, you know, writing before the age of, like, you know, phones and iPads. I can remember when I first began really with the writing bug. I was at Hershey Park with my family, and, you know, it was in the middle of the afternoon, and I was in Hershey Park. And again, there's no phones, there's no writing tablets, there's nothing. You know, we're on vacation, so we're shorts, t-shirts. And I got this idea, and I had to get it down on paper, and I had nothing with me. And I was racing around the park looking for something to write on and something to write with. So I managed to get like a few napkins and like a pen off the girl who was working the hot dog stand or whatever, and start scribbling things down, just to get them down on paper. So ideally, I mean, if I can plan it, which doesn't happen all that often, you know, I'd be in my office, in my house, in my chair with my computer, writing away. You know, it does happen on occasion, but more often than not, when you get inspired or something strikes you and you want to preserve it, you know, you have to seize the moment, whenever that might be. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, it's in the middle of the night, you wake up and, you know you're not going to bed anymore. You're going to the computer, you're going somewhere, and you're getting down what you have to get down, until you're satisfied, as Richie described. You know, you've satisfied that moment until the next one comes. So I think for a lot of people who write, you know, it's this. I know people say, is it a blessing or is it a curse? You know, and I would say, you know, it's like a I guess a sweet sort of suffering. You know, there are things that happen because you write, and things that can't happen because you write. But I wouldn't trade it for the world, and I wouldn't see it myself any other way than writing.
Okay, so blessing or a curse, Jeff?
I think it's a blessing, and the reason I think it's a blessing, you know, I consider writing like the Hall of Fame. I mean, I'm not going to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame, I'm not going to go to the Teaching Hall of Fame, but my book is in the Library of Congress, and that's infamy. And when I tell children, when I speak to them, that in my life I never thought I was be able to publish something. And like Mr. Nappi, I published, and Mr. Woods, I sent things to the Times, I had things published in the New York Times, coaching magazines, Newsday. You know, but I think having a book in that Library of Congress, that to me is the Hall of Fame, and that's precious to me, because after I'm long gone, that's still going
It's
to
your
be there.
legacy, yeah. Richie, blessing or a curse being a writer?
It's definitely a blessing for me. Like Frank used the word purge, that's the word I should have used. That's why he's a better writer than I am. And because that's how I feel when it's done. I feel really satisfied. So yeah, it's definitely a blessing.
Bonnie, blessing, curse?
I think it depends on what you want out of it. You know, if you're just writing for your own sake and to get something out and to tell a good story or put down a piece of history, I think it's always a blessing. You know, it's something that feels good. If it's something that you're looking, like sometimes, you know, younger writers and things will say like, you know, oh, you know, do you want to be famous or do you want all of these kinds of things? If you put that kind of expectation on yourself, then it can feel like a curse. You can constantly feel like you're chasing the top, like you're chasing sales, like you're chasing that. But I think if you can relax and just look at a story, like I think the neatest thing was the first time I got an email from someone who read it and really enjoyed it, and it was someone I didn't know. It wasn't like my cousin or my neighbor. It was like a perfect stranger who actually found me online and emailed me and told me how much they liked it. That was an amazing moment, because I don't claim I'm any F. Scott. I don't have any, you know, illusions of being, you know, remembered forever. But when I have a couple of ladies who reach out and say, will you Skype us in for, you know, our writers group, or will you do this, or will you do that? That's really cool. That's really cool to know somebody read my story, doesn't know me, and liked it, and reached out. So again, if you look at it from that perspective of just enjoying the craft of what you did, I always see it as a blessing, you know, even when everybody's on the beach and I'm at home, you know, doing something like that.
Okay, I have a whole list of more questions, but for the sake of time, I want to be able to open it up to anybody else that might have a question. So this is going to be my last one. And Bonnie, I'll start with you because you mentioned that you were working on a book that's set in Ireland, and then you have a work in progress about Medusa. Do you have, can you tell us a little bit about your works in progress, if you have any more things that you're going to be working on, and is there a timeline for us that we can expect your works to come out?
All right. So the one that I just finished last weekend is more of a middle grade story, and this also was inspired by telling stories to my daughter, and I used to try to get her to go to sleep, and I tried to make the stories, I used to try to make her the awful character in the story, and she laughs about this now. I would be falling asleep, too tired to even read a book, so she was very young, and she liked unicorns and things, so I would say, oh, there's this beautiful garden, and there's this unicorn with a rainbow mane, and it flies, and all this stuff, and I name everybody in my story after someone. I'd say, and her name was, and she'd go like this, and I'd say, Bonnie, and she'd go, and I'd say, and then there's this flea that won't stop climbing on the unicorn, and I'd give this horrible description, and she'd go, oh no, oh no, oh no, and sure enough, it was her, and she'd say, oh, you did it again. And I'd say, well, you asked me for another story. You keep asking for stories, you're gonna get more interesting. So, this one came from a story I told her about this girl from New York, actually, about a 12-year-old, who gets sent over to Ireland because she gets into a little bit of trouble, and her parents can't quite manage her. It's all innocent, nothing too horrible. So she goes over there, and there's this house that has this beautiful round tower. And if you've ever been to Ireland, my last name's Hennessy. I'm not Irish, but I'm married to somebody, which means I have to be more Irish than if I was born Irish. So I've lived there, spent a lot of time there. So they have these beautiful old round towers, and they're very mysterious. There's not a lot of clarity as to why they were built or what they were for. But one of the things that I remember hearing is that when you look at an aerial photo of all of the round towers around Ireland, and there's over a dozen of them, they match certain constellations, and they actually think that there might have been some sort of cosmic reason why they put them where they did. They might have thought they used the word tuning forks, like they were hoping that they could harness some sort of energy from the heavens. And so I think that was in the back of my head, because I did always know that. I think that was cool. So when she goes up there, she of course has to explore it, even though she's not supposed to. She ends up finding a hole in the floor that becomes this window into another time, and a little boy who's locked up there. And so she and this boy start this relationship where she's running up the tower through the floor to climb down through his time and run around medieval days and getting into a whole lot of trouble, and eventually bringing him back to her time. And so there's a gypsy in there, there's a little bit of, like I said, of time travel, a little bit of history, and actually I was impressed because I was able to put some humor in there. It's hard to write humor in, to put something in there and hope people are gonna laugh. And so I was happy. I gave a first draft to a couple kids to read who are the harshest critics, my daughter's friends, and I said, can you read that chapter for me? And so when I heard giggles from the next room, I took that as a good sign. So that one's coming down the pike. I just finished the first draft of that. I couldn't even put a date on that, just because it's still very fresh. And like I said, I have two in the queue. I have a woman's fiction story, which requires no research, no nothing, because we live that every day. And the Medusa story, that will be a little ways away, because that's going to take me a little time. But my students were excited. We were reading a lot of the Odyssey this year, and she's a very controversial figure, and we were going back and forth, and you talk about ideas that hit you. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I said, oh my God, this poor girl needs her story told. She needs a woman to do it. None of these, writers from mythical times who put all these horrible labels on her. So it was
Medusa?
Cute. Yeah.
She's somebody to be sort of pitied?
She's got a very complicated story. If you look at history, she looks like this horrible monster. Meanwhile, she is a character she was actually a beautiful woman who was cursed and turned into this monster after, there's either a suggestion that she had sex with a god or was raped by a god. And so it was interesting when the kids hear the backstory for it and I show them the History Channel things, they were really shocked. They said, oh my God, why is she considered such a horrible monster when she has this backstory to her? And so like I said, it was funny, in the middle of the night, I woke up one day and that's when I was like, oh, I've got to write this. So I came in the next day and I told the kids, because I was publishing this book and they used to come in every day, Mrs. Hennessy, how's it going? And they were so excited for it. They helped me pick the cover when I had several designs. And so I said, guys, I think I got my next book. And they were like, really? What is it? And so I told them, I said, I want to write about Medusa. And And after all the history that we've been doing on her, they were like, yes, somebody needs to write that story. So I was cracking up, because they, of course, don't understand time management. They're ninth graders, so they come in the next day. So is it done yet? Have you read the story yet? So I had to explain the queue to them. It's in the queue. It's in the queue. All right, they'll get there. And they said, by the time we graduate, are you sure? And I said, I hope so. So those are my stories in the queue.
Great. Richie, do you have any works in progress for us?
Yeah. One book I'm doing is another historical book. It's Oceanside Then and Now pictures with captions. And I've been taking the pictures with some students a couple of years ago and by myself. So it's going to have different sections of Oceanside, what it looked like, and the story behind that, and then what it looks like today. But when I finally do write fiction, I want to write a story on junior high events in the 70s, because I don't think I've never seen one written in that time period. And we had a real interesting time here in Oceanside Junior High. And I met a lot of characters, and it was an interesting time to go to school. So that's what's going to happen sooner or later. I don't know what it's going to become of that, but I'm definitely going to write that.
Great. Frank, works in progress.
Well, I've been admonished more than one time by more than one literary agent about not sticking to one genre. Apparently the conventional wisdom is that you stick to one genre and build a readership, and that's the way you become successful as an author. But my problem is that, when things strike me as interesting or I'm passionate about something, I want to pursue it. So for instance, the first book was, historical fiction about the World War II veteran and the PTSD. Then I went to the YA series, Mickey Tussa, the autistic pitcher, and I've done 2 psychological thrillers, the second of which is right now in negotiations for publication. So I just finished that, and now I'm stepping out again somewhere else, and I'm playing with a memoir right now, reminiscences from early school, and their influence on how we become adults and how those things tend to surface. So, and of course, in the back of my mind, there's always, like I'm sure everybody up here, about 10 or 15 or 20 other things floating around that haven't really come to fruition yet, enough to pursue. But that's been keeping me busy.
Great.
Stuck here. I started putting together another book back in 2007. It's kind of like a combination of fiction, nonfiction. In my career as a coach, as a teacher, I met so many athletes that were the underdogs. One player that I know, Coach Woods may remember him, Mr. Nappi, Kevin Stakem, who had a great career with the Boston Celtics. He was cut by his 9th grade basketball team. His sophomore year, he made the JV. He was like the last player taken. His varsity at a high school in Queens, he became an all-city player. He got a full scholarship to Providence College, and he was drafted and played in the NBA for a lot of years. So him and a bunch of other people that I've come in contact with as the underdog, the ones who were cut. So I'm trying to, I started to, and then I put it on hold back in 2009. But I'm yearning. I expressed my feelings before about creativity. I think being creative is so important. But I'm going to get back and I'm going to finish this book, and maybe I'll be back here in 2 more years.
Great. We look forward to it. We're going to hold you to that. Time is really running out on us, but I'd like to open it up to the floor. Does anybody have a question for the authors? I did a very good job then, I would like to say. Clearly, I covered it. Okay, there we go.
I was wondering if you could each just touch on the publishing process and how you went about it. I know there's more options now for publishing, and what route you each took to getting your work published. And
We'll start here and just work our way down.
There's always the art of writing, and then there's the business of writing. And I think a lot of us are born wanting to write, not necessarily being business people. So this is definitely always the challenge. I've never spoken to a writer who hasn't cringed when you talked about actually publishing and promoting and all of these things. I know for me, like I said, after I wrote this last book, I've sent out dozens and dozens of letters to agents. And every time I would get something back, they would say, you know what, this is fabulous, we like it, this and that, but we don't know how to sell you. And so that was very, very frustrating. And so I was able to take advantage of the other ways of getting published now. So I remember saying to them, well, what do you need? They say, you need a platform, you need to be somebody, we need to know you, we need to know we can sell you. And so my husband kept saying, why don't you just publish it on your own? A lot of people are doing that now, and some people are becoming successful. So I actually asked a few of them who said they liked it. They said it has nothing to do with your talent, it's just everything's flooded, it's a tough industry to get into. And so they actually gave me a number. They said if you can sell or download, whatever, get 10,000 copies of your book out, come back to us, and we want to look at the next one. We're very happy with this one, blah, blah, blah. So I went through the process of self-publishing, which sounds so easy, when you say it, self-publishing. But it's definitely not easy, and it's not for the faint of heart, and you have to be committed. I talk about all those mornings I got up early to write. Well, publishing, it was even worse, because we have day jobs, I have a family, and I was putting in easily 13, 14-hour days, doing everything from working on the content, getting that ready in the end, hiring people to do covers, I made a trailer, I did this, I did that, and, then there's the promoting side. You can't just put it out there. It's just not like you put it on Amazon and suddenly go, oh, it's done. No, nobody sees it unless you promote it. So that became a whole nother education process of getting that together. And if you know what you're doing and you are dedicated to it, like I use several different ways of promoting it, different websites that would, put it up for people to see, you can see it climb in numbers. My book has gone as high as #1 on Amazon several times, but if you stop promoting it and you step away from it, as I've done the last few months, it goes back down. So it's just a constant business, a constant energy that you have to put into it. And it's hard to see something that's good enough to hit #1, not stay at #1 unless you're willing to put in hours and hours of regular time keeping it there, So I always laughed. I finished a batch of papers recently, and I went back on and I found what I have to do to get it back up. But it is definitely always work, but I am happy to say that it looks like by this summer I will have hit the 10,000 mark. Because I'm pretty close right now. So that's why I'm happy I finished this next one, because then hopefully I can go that other route, because it's all about distribution. It's all about having someone who can get your books where you need it to be. But even then, I know I've spoken to you before, about even if you go the traditional route, it's still up to you to promote that book. It's just not the world where you put it out there and it just sells, It's still definitely a lot of work. And that's where I say, if you say, is it a gift or a curse, I forget how you put it, if you're married to those numbers and you're constantly watching it, that can be really scary. It was fabulous when I was riding high, but then again, when you step away, if that's the reason you did it, it can be a little bit scary, But so far, so good. I've been enjoying it. It's a lot of work, labor of love.
Thanks, Bonnie.
I also published my first book, but I'm, again, very different than the other authors up here. I just did it to get it to libraries, so I had to print it, and people did buy it because I put some advertisements in local film magazines. Regarding the books that I've done for Oceanside, after I found that book on Syosset, I looked at the publisher and I contacted the publisher, and they had a whole format for how to submit the presentation for what book you were going to write, and then they got back to me and they just said okay. And then, they gave me a certain time to do it. And then because I did that, they contacted me when they started a new series. It's a very small publisher. They make their money because they do all the small towns in the United States now. They try and get people to write the history. So it's small numbers of people would buy that, but it's large numbers of areas. So that's how they make their money. So the second series was this legendary local series. So they contacted me, and then I submitted it again, and they just gave it the okay. But it is a little frustrating working, even with a historical book, because I had written, they asked me to cut 20,000 words from the first book, but I had a lot more information I thought was interesting, and it's definitely annoying work. I'm not a creative writer like the other authors, but I know some of the frustrations, so that's it for me.
Thanks, Regine.
Well, I was both foolish and fortunate when I first tackled the business side of this. When I first had those short stories that I mentioned previously, and I was wanted to have them looked at, professionally. I was first of all very incredulous that they were worthy of publication. And people would tell me, "Oh, they're pretty good," but it just was a small circle head by my mother, who was telling me, "This is the best thing I ever read." I'm like, "Mom, relax. It's not the best thing you ever read." She's telling me, "Come on, you gotta get it published." So I figured, okay, this is easy enough. And I sent out, a bunch of the stories to maybe like 20 or 30 or 40 publishers, and I just sat back and waited for them to tell me, how they all wanted to fight over who was going to publish my book. Well, of course, the steady stream of the cards came back in the mail with, sorry, no thank you, sorry, no thank you. I had a whole bunch of them coming. I got discouraged and I stopped for a little while, and then I submitted like another round of them, and I got a few letters this time, very much like what Bonnie was saying. Well, we don't really know who you are, and we really can't market this, so no thank you. Your ego takes a beating when you're out there, when you put yourself out there. So some time had passed. I remember I got a message in my mailbox here at school, right in the English Resource Center. And I went to my mailbox, and this is after having been rejected like 9,000 times, so I was not in the right frame of mind. And I went and I saw the message, and it said, Joe Kleeman from St. Martin's Press wants to talk to you. So again, not being in the right frame of mind, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? It's not good enough to get rejected through the mail. Now they're calling me to tell me no good. So I called him, and I found out that, he said, well, I pulled your unsolicited submission, because you're really supposed to go through an agent. I didn't know that back then. Unsolicited submission off the pile, and I really like the short stories. That was the good news. He said, we can do this. I'm like, that's great, that's great. And he said, the only thing I want you to do is you have to build a fictional framework around those stories, because no one wants to read short stories about war. And I was like, no problem, it's great. I was so happy. Hung up the phone, and then about 10 minutes later, I'm like, holy shit, I can't write a whole book. What am I going to do? I started panicking. It turned out okay, fortunately. And while I was doing that, I had spoken to, while Joe was editing, we were going through the editing process, I started writing Mickey Tussler, the first Mickey Tussler book that St. Martin's Press also published. So that worked out well. And then after this first book came out, while I was doing the edits for that first book, the second story, it was not intended to be a series. And I just the characters had life to them still. So I was writing, and I proposed it to them, and here's where the business side comes in. They said, well, he only sold like 7,000 copies, and we don't really know if there's any more interest in that Mickey Tussler thing. And I said to them, come on, they just made a movie out of it. Are you kidding me? There's a movie? No. So perseverance is really kind of what Bonnie was talking about. You have to not be willing to take no for an answer, and you have to be resilient. So Skyhorse Publishing in Manhattan, after emails and phone calls and everything else, took the sequel, and they liked it a lot, and they published it, and then they published the third one as well. So I've been with them since, and I'm trying to still negotiate maybe like a prequel to that series there. So things are really actually pretty good. It's a smaller publisher, so they're more attentive to the needs in the bigger publisher. But I've also gone the self-publishing route too. I reissued Echoes in paperback because St. Martin's Press didn't do it, so I did that. And then the first psychological thriller that I just couldn't place anywhere, even though I got a nice endorsement from Nelson DeMille, I couldn't, because it was either dark, controversial, it involves a teacher and a student and some other things that happen that are a little, perhaps controversial or delicate. So I wound up self-publishing that one. And right now, I'm in the process of negotiating more formally with the second thriller that I finished. So I've gone, in all different routes. But the thing that resonates most, it's true, if you want to write and you're serious about having people read what you write and you want to be published and read, it's daunting in that it's so time exhaustive. A lot of time is spent, writing, which is the pleasurable part, and then there's a part that's attached to it where you have to be dogged in your pursuit of promoting yourself, and it's time consuming. So that's the down part. But when you get a nice email or a nice note, as Bonnie was saying, it sort of makes it all worth it.
Thank you. So I too, back when I had my book published, I went the route of finding a publisher. It was exhausting, time-consuming. It took a lot of my time when I had the time to find a publisher. I started out by going to publishers that dealt with children's books. Then you have to go through, well, is it a nonfiction or a fiction, how-to books versus biography kind of books that I alluded to before, those professional athletes. Then, that took me to other places, religious publishers. It was amazing how many religion publishers there are out there. So you try to find an angle to get your book published. Finally, I found someone that was able to publish it. They want to know if you have an agent. I said, I'm not that sophisticated to have an agent. I wasn't in this to make money. I'm not really into it for the business side of it. I just wanted to get my message out to how children should be be treated in sports, the number one thing to have fun, ways to have fun, for kids to enjoy their experience. So I finally found the publisher, and I said, wow. So they helped me publish they published the book for me. Of course, they get a price. Every book you sell, they get a price. And I liked, sitting down with the artist, doing artwork, and I really enjoyed the tributes that I put in my book to my mom and dad. God, they would have been so proud of me, that wow, their son, that, whoever thought I'd be an author, but there it is. So I published the book, and here I am.
Is there no other questions? Oh, Emma?
Well, Mr. Risener, I have a question about, being a student athlete growing up. Did you really enjoy reading? Because I don't right now. I don't like writing essays and stuff, but how did you end up being a writer when you're so busy playing sports?
That's a very good question, Emma, and thank you for asking it, and thanks for coming, because I know Emma has a game. Emma has a game tonight in Oyster Bay at 6:30.
In fairness, I kind of forced her to come. I
she's
screamed her
getting
name
on
out
us.
the window to make sure, oh, of course you were.
So, Emma, to answer your question, even I alluded to before the books I'm reading now. So right now I'm so much into the World War II stuff. I can't sit. My personality, I cannot sit for more than 5 minutes reading. So I tell myself, I'm going to read 5 pages, put the book down, and then I do a push-up, or I'll walk, or I'll ride my bike, my stationary bike in my basement, or I'm on the plane. That's me. So I'll read for 5 minutes, 5 pages. I'll put the book down, I'll pick it up again. And I actually did the same thing when I was writing my book. I used to just write thoughts, put it down. It took me 2 years to write it, but I got it done. So to be a student athlete today, it's all, what I said before, it's all about managing your time in your life, what's important to you. Last night, I could have stayed up watching something on TV. I decided I needed some rest, so I went to sleep early. Tonight, I'm going to a middle school parent meeting that I'm hosting at the middle school. But that's important to me. My superintendent's here, my assistant's here, I have to say that's important to me. But I will still manage during today to get a little bit of reading in on something I'm reading, and also to get my exercise in.
Great question.
I hope that
Thanks,
answers your
Emma.
question.
Anybody else have a question? Well, thank you all so much for coming out and celebrating our authors and celebrating writing. And thank you to our authors. You did terrific. And we look forward to having you back. Please join us in 200A for some cookies and coffee if you're interested.
Thank you, Chris
Thank
Sartory.
you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sartory.